Thank you, guys. Good morning, everybody. As Roy said, my name is Banerjee. I work for Netcracker technology. The topic today is around hyperautomation. Let me step back in time a little bit and talk a little bit about when did we come across the concept of automation. I mean, typically, people tend to think, right, and I also thought the same. It came around the 11th century with manufacturing automation. When I dug a little deeper, I saw it was a few thousand years before that. In fact, a lot of the Greek mythological books as well as literature talks about this concept. The first one, really, if you trace back in time, it's around the 8th century BC. Homer's The Iliad talks about this. In that, there's a great concept of how Hephaestus, the god of the blacksmiths and artisans and others, was trusted with the job by the gods of Mount Olympus to create the best weaponry that's out there possible to fight, all the mortals, the other gods, and things like that. And he went and he started creating those. And in that context, they talk about something called automatons. Very interestingly, if you look at what automatons are, they talk about robotics. They talk about self-organizing equipment manufactured and things such as those. So think about that, right? The Iliad, I mean, it's like 8th century, thousands and thousands of years back, talked about that. If we dig into it and if we think about it and pay a little bit more attention to this, we will see not much has really changed today, right? If we replace Mount Olympus with the operator groups, and if you say, look at Hephaestus and, replace that with the CTOs and CIOs of the operators, and all of these automations and automatons they're talking about are all the software solutions, SDN, and cloud and 5G, et cetera, that we talk about today. Fast forward a few thousand years and, we are here. We're talking about pretty much the same things going back. Now, in telecom, obviously, the automation started much later. We started with, obviously, automating our switchboards from manual to automation and so on. We have evolved. And obviously, we have tried to introduce automation to improve performance, take cost out of the system, and so on and so forth. However, even after so many years, right, it's been a century plus, what we have achieved today is not optimal, right? I mean, at best, we can say that we are in an environment which is about partial automation. I would even argue that till date, right, partial automation has been okay. It did not give us the optimal results that we were looking for, but it has not been a showstopper, even for some of the services that we are launching today, right? This is slowly starting to change. Now, as we look into 5G, the next generation of architecture and other, we know what used to be kind of good enough is probably not good enough anymore, right? We are at a point of time where there's no other option but to look at something more sustainable, because we know for a fact the partial automation of the industry the way it is today is obviously not sustainable. And why is that? Let's look at two major broad areas of examples, right? One of the first reasons is, so let's look at some of the roadblocks that we are seeing today and look at the popular services that people have been talking about from the morning, in fact. The most popular of them, let's look at SD-WAN, for example, right? I mean, the level of automation in SD-WAN at best can be said as medium. The reason, the only thing that is automated is really your zero-touch provisioning of your CPE solutions that you're using, and that too proprietary in most cases. You add to that scale hundreds and hundreds of customer sites. You try to decouple that and add your value-added service and applications on top of your SD-WAN offering. It's not that easy anymore, right? So when you look at a multi-vendor ecosystem, which is I have SD-WAN from one vendor, and I'm bringing value-added services from all sorts of other vendors of my choice, and not the choice of what the SD-WAN vendor provides, that's not so easy anymore. The other part of it is how do you manage that commercially? A lot of the solutions that come with SD-WAN, the portal, etc., are for technical folks, not so much about a consumer or an enterprise user, or more of a business user. So there are a lot of problems there, no automation at the service layer, all that makes it much more complicated. If you look at the second area, which is very, very popular, there's a lot of projects going on, obviously, is voice over LTE. This is the time when we are slowly moving to a kind of an area where most of the solutions, we used to have virtualized VoLTE for a while. And it was pretty much the PNFs directly put on a hypervisor and so on. It wasn't really giving the scale that people were looking for from a VNF standpoint. Now, as we move into a cloud-native kind of an environment, and we had heard previous talks about that before, now those 10 things have now moved into hundreds of microservices. How do you manage that effectively? Secondly, how do you do the upgrade cycles, which used to be 6 to 8 months, now becoming 4 weeks or so? And again, if you're bringing in your cloud-native VNFs for your VoLTE from all sorts of different vendors, you are really talking about an environment which is maybe low to medium from an automation standpoint. Now, if you go on and buy everything from one vendor, then that probably works. Third is the transport network. Now, this is probably the most underappreciated of all of it, because people talk about the edge services, SD-WAN and so on, and IMS-centric VoLTE services, but the transport network is underappreciated. And the automation is probably the least today, right? Again, a multi-vendor kind of an environment. Most of the devices when the transport network today are not SDNized. In fact, one of the recent studies we did with some of the analysts out there is about 85% of your transport network devices are not SDNized today. So when you're trying to bring it together, so you're going to have physical network functions. You have certain SDNized kind of devices, and you want to bring it together and provide on-demand services in a multi-vendor environment. We are at a very low point in automation when we look at that. The second important reason is that when we look at 5G and all the promises that 5G is going to bring, right? We are not there yet, but it's slowly coming in. This partial automation will be a showstopper, right? All the business models, all the enterprise business models that operators are planning for, which is dependent on 5G, native 5G with an edge cloud, with real AI, and we know some of the stats, and I'm going to go to that. Number of connected things, for example, increasing exponentially in the next few years. Edge sites, right? Edge clouds, network slices, all of these things that we talk about, right? Without proper hyper-automation and with partial automation that exists today, that's really not going to be possible. To be able to meet that, to be able to get to that, I think there are a few important things that we need to consider. One, your automation needs to be intelligence-driven, right? Bad data in, obviously your automation will be flawed. You need to be able to do that with intelligence. Artificial intelligence, advanced analytics, all of that plays a very important role. We talk about automation in different parts, but for 5G, it's about end-to-end automation. From your edge devices, your IoT devices, or any of those edge devices, to your core. Automation around 5G is also about hybrid cloud at a massive scale. And there is an element of the platform economy we need to consider when we talk about 5G, because most of the business model that we're talking here, e-health or gaming or autonomous cars, etc., it's partner-driven business model. You need to be able to work with partners at a massive scale to achieve the platform economy benefits that people typically talk about, but only the over-the-top players really do. A lot of the automation thing, we can see great examples when we look at over-the-top players, and we know that, right? I mean, we have seen Uber, we have seen Airbnb, we have seen Booking.com. They have used some of these automation technologies to scale, to do business in unprecedented ways. Now, we can consider this, we can look at it and say, hey, those are all different industries. They are not telecom. So, it's a different business model. Let's not compare apples and oranges. Let me try to compare oranges and maybe oranges, right? Let's look at one of the most disruptive operators today, right? If you look at Rakuten, for example, and people know them now after a lot of promotions and all of that, the Japanese e-commerce conglomerate, right, coming and trying to become a 5G operator. Yes, there are some initial hiccups and so on, but they're going in a full cloud-native disruptive approach to the mobility space. So with digital transformation, mobility, and your customer-first approach, they're breaking all the rules of telecom and retail. The way they're bringing together telecom services with loyalty mechanisms, rewards, and so on, is unprecedented. And they're already here. We will see more Rakutens in the future as we move along. And I don't know, if this is not something which gives operators sleepless nights, I don't know what else will. So if we look at and think about how you can prepare for automation, I will say there are a couple of things. There's a few things that we think are very, very important. We have, as an industry, always talked about and said we have to counter the over-the-top players. We have to compete and counter. I think we are at a point in time today with all the technologies that is available to us, be it SDN and FV, be it cloud, our inherent expertise on network, and upcoming 5G, to be able to turn the tables. We are at a point in time where I think if we do it right, we can disrupt the disruptors. Of course, for that, I think there are a few things which we need to keep in mind. One, obviously, we need a new operations environment. Two, we need a new deployment architecture because it's all distributed, it's cloud, it's very, very different than the way we have done business before. And the bigger part of it is, since we have legacy, and that's not going to go away, we need to be able to fix today's automation gap. And how can we do that effectively? So let's look at it one at a time, right? Let's look at a new operations environment. We believe when we talk about the new operations environment, we need the stuff that we had in our OSS. It's not going to go away. We need certain things of OSS that's still important. However, it needs to combine with orchestration. You cannot have your VNF or NFV orchestration operating in isolation without your OSS because you need to bring it together. The third part of it is your SDN. If you have your SDN controllers and your SDN management systems, so collapsing those silos that exist between your OSS, your NFV orchestration, your SDN, to bring together, microservice-based functionalities that we see, right? And obviously adding some new functionality. So for example, for 5G, you're going to add network slice management functionality. Multi-access edge compute, for example, that functionality, those things need to come in as well. And then all of them needs to come together to create the new operations environment. And obviously for all of these attributes are very, very critical. It needs to be cloud native, so your old OSS has to evolve, add new features and functionalities. It needs to be real time. Obviously needs to be standards driven and open API driven. Netcracker is doing a lot of work on that. It's very, very critical. And obviously bringing together advanced analytics and AI. Second, we're talking about a deployment architecture, which needs to be more distributed. We not only break down the SDN and FV silos, we provide closed-loop automation, but we divide the network into logical domains. Think about your edge, your network domain, as well as your core domain. How do you automate that, make it more autonomous? Bring together a little bit of the OSS things that are critical for that, some elements of orchestration, some elements of SDN controller. Obviously, bring OSS means bringing the FCAPs and AI, and then assurance, and then automating each domain as we go by, work with partners, and then automate that as you go along. So the most important thing is, right, it's not driven by IT architectural goals, because we are many architects here, we love it, right? The best architecture that there is. And we will go on endlessly trying to create that architecture. Here, it's driven by business intent. You can automate at your own pace, at your own business demands. You might start with network, you might go with edge, you might then with core. Depends on what your business intent is. I think that's the most important thing. So how do you fix automation gaps today? I'm going to go with 3 examples of where we are working with our operators, and we're going to talk about them briefly. Let's look at automating the transport domain. I'm going to start with this because it's the most neglected of all of that, right? And probably the most critical pillar that you're going to build your 5G and your other network on. So I talked about this before. We talked about on-demand services, right? With zero-touch fulfillment and addressing that very, very quickly, not over a period of time, and obviously creating a multi-vendor environment. How do we do it? We talked about collapsing SDN NFV with OSS and with your NFV orchestration, bringing that together in an autonomous, logical domain orchestration concept. Brings together things such as, right, your multi-layer path compute, because that's become important, because automating your traffic on your packet or optical or microwave, number of devices running on top of it. For people who have seen our press release a few days back, this is exactly what we are doing with Deutsche Telekom today. Automating their transport domain, making it on demand, and making sure that they create the right infrastructure for their upcoming enterprise services and for 5G. So what are the benefits, right? If you look at what it enables them to do is to provide real-time network discovery, provisioning with much more standardizing models, proactive network assurance, provide on-demand services with strict SLAs for their enterprise customer, and so on and so forth. Some of the benefits you can see right here. Let's look at SD-WAN, for example, right? From a partial to fully automated SD-WAN. Now, we talked about, in my previous slides, I talked about the problem with scale and the problem with multi-vendor, right? Decoupling just the SDN offering with your value-added services and so on, and providing the digital BSS layer to be able to package the services, to charge for the services, to bundle the services with your typical IT and your network services. This is, we are doing this for many of our customers, TELUS, Telefonica Mexico, and others. The digital marketplace brings together not just SD-WAN, but brings together other services, value-added service, IT applications, and so on, as part of one beautiful marketplace. In fact, we are doing a POC at MEF this year on this concept. We are bringing together multiple SD-WAN vendors, because that's one other thing that the operators are asking for. I'm not going to give one SD-WAN vendor, that's how it all started, to my enterprise customer and say, you take it or leave it, because the customer can easily go to somebody else and get that directly to the SD-WAN vendors, but trying to bring it together. And so we're running a POC where we have Versa, Silver Peak, NEC, sponsored by NTT Docomo, and we are the orchestration at MEF in LA this year. And what it brings really, we are on orchestration examples, bring your service provisioning and lifecycle management, simplify multi-vendor, and giving the customer experience, not a technical portal, but a digital UI and customer experience to expand into the SMB marketplace. The last example, automating voice over LTE. Now we talked about cloud native VNFs, right? Let's say we have from tens to hundreds of microservices running these VNFs. How do you manage that for a multi-vendor environment? This is something we are doing for Vodafone. And bringing together some of those components that we talk about, in this case, is NFV orchestration and OSS together to be able to automate voice over LTE for the end customer. What it does, it provides the DevOps service launch and operations. It provides automated network service lifecycle management, because it's not just about day zero, just get the service up and running, but it's also about your day 2, your day 3, your day N operations, entire lifecycle management, closed loop assurance, being able to figure out the best way to proactively create capacity management and control. How do you create the cloud native resiliency and scalability and so on? Some of the results that we have got from our customers are absolutely fantastic. Test automation, which used to be at 40%, gone down to 100%, for example. from 6 weeks of a service deployment time frame to 2 weeks, and site recovery, which used to take them weeks, gone down. And this is the combination of different parameters from some of our customers, right? To site discovery to less than 30 minutes, and we are aiming for it to go down further. So now we talked about different network domains, different area, edge, transport, core, automation. If you have to bring your hyper-automation in 5G, you need to bring this all together. So just a quick plug-in. At the Content Hub today at 2:25, we are going to show these things, real-time, in action. And this is some of the shortened version of the skin that we are working with some of the largest operators in the world. So love to see you guys there. So let me wrap it up by a couple of things, right? So partial automation is really not an option anymore. We need to evolve. If you have to get the best out of 5G and the next generation of network infrastructure and all the investments that you have been making, you need to do a couple of things. One, end-to-end automation. To achieve business goal, start by filling the automation gaps. It requires a new environment that brings OSS, SDNFV, all of these things together, and cloud, all of these together. And obviously make sure, when we talk about a distributed architecture, that your end operations management architecture is also distributed, it's cloud native, and it's scalable. Now I'm going to end it with the last parting thought for my operator friends here. Now is the time really for automation to take place. Either you are going to create that automation, or unfortunately, you will be automated. Thank you very much.